I don't know if I can blame the temporal loom or whatever it is for last week, but I swear, I promise you guys, we did review Loki season one, and then the review disappeared into thin air, much to my anger and frustration on Monday as I went to put the show together. But ladies and gentlemen, we are back to discuss episode 1 and 2 now of Loki. We're going to do a double dose and combine it with this week's episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, joining me and making his grand return after last week's apparent dress rehearsal that I never told him was a dress rehearsal is the one, the only Dan, 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 Dan Lynham. Dan Lynham, you're very welcome back to page 180 again, even though you were technically back last week. Thank you off the top for being so understanding of this. This is like a ritual in podcasting that we've managed to avoid an entire show getting lost to this point, which is miraculous in a way. But again, like I appreciate kind of your patience with this as well.
It was so good, no computer system could handle it. It was like, oh, amazing. Shame, lost to the end of time. It's off in a temporal loop.
It is. It's somewhere out there. There is a timeline where this show got released.
Yeah, and it's just been pruned. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, the show got pruned.
Already.
I know. This is it. But no, you're very welcome back to page 180. Can't wait to discuss a big few weeks from Marvel because we've got obviously this ongoing. The same week that this airs, actually the same day that most people will be watching it. Will be the date of the release of the Marvels. And of course, in the meantime, we're big Spider-Man fans, and you've got Spider-Man 2. I tweeted out today that because I wanted to go back over the first two games, just because it's an excuse, because they're amazing games. I have played so much Spider-Man and Miles Morales over the past few weeks that my love language is now swing kicks. So like I cannot wait to discuss it all, and we will over the next few weeks. Hopefully all positive. But we're going to start with Loki. And I want to kind of get into, before we get into episodes 1 and 2. So what we're going to do this week is just a dual review of both episodes, and kind of take you into where we are and get you caught up. But before we get into this season of Loki, I want to just do a temperature check for what your thoughts were around season one and how you felt kind of coming into this season, so we can kind of contrast that with how we feel now after the first 2 weeks. What were your thoughts in season one? I know we've discussed it before, but worth kind of repeating if anyone can't remember or hasn't heard.
Definitely, yeah. And it's a shame that it did get lost last week, but it's definitely a show where you really have to take in everything that happened in season one, just so we can figure out where we're going forward, where the story is branching, if you will, coming to this season. So for me, obviously, we discussed a lot, especially during our Secret Invasion line, that like Falcon Winter Soldier is my favorite, but Loki is always sat in the middle for me. And it's because I don't want to say like the pacing is bad, but it's just that a lot of the story points, a lot of mechanics driving it seemed a bit all over the place. And the strange thing was, I thought back to when the first trailer for Loki came out and he was seeing all of his variants. We didn't see any TVA stuff enter. That I really like this really chaotic approach to this multiverse elements that had been teased so handy. And I guess when I first started watching it, when I first came in, the TVA came in, I didn't know how I felt about that, but it's taken me a while to warm it, the strength of the characters and everything like that. But Loki season one was its own thing, and as unique and different and aesthetically Kirby-esque that it was, it just didn't grab me the way it grabbed some other people. And I understood why. But now, as we said last week, that season two just has already changed that.
Yeah.
Season one better.
And yeah, and that's it. And I'm very much the same mind coming into season two, in that I felt that this got largely overrated as a series. Well, also being a good series. I thought Loki season one was very ambitious, and I admire and I prefer series that swing and miss sometimes, rather than, again, the likes of Secret Invasion, which just play it totally safe and it's boring by the end. Whereas this actually swung and it went for it. So I admired that, but I found it quite uneven. It felt like the storyline changed every week, and it was 6 mini movies that you had to work to connect them all together because they were trying to do so many things and figure out what this was. I think recency bias played a lot for people because it ended with the best episode, and it's the one Marvel TV show. Actually, I tell a lie, She-Hulk had an amazing finale too, for very different reasons. But for me, I think the finale being so strong and the strongest episodes made people remember it really well. In a way, it's almost the inverse. WandaVision is the peak of Marvel TV so far for me. But I think in the inverse of how WandaVision gets remembered, which was an amazing show for every episode, right up until they kind of dropped the ball a little bit in that Marvel finale way. I feel that Loki was the opposite, and it was quite an average show that gets remembered better than it was because of the finale. So I was interested by it. I was very open to it. Having said that, though, I think it has aged very well because for me, watching Loki was the last time I was in on the multiverse. I felt that they explained the multiverse very well. They dumbed it down without making it too patronizing, and kept it simple and the stakes relatively simple and to keep us involved. Whereas I think they've kind of made a bit of a mess with their attempts at multiverse stories with the likes of Doctor Strange and Ant-Man in the meantime. So intrigued by this, excited by this, but not necessarily a super fan, at least going into season 1, and we'll kind of jump off at season 2 now and discuss how we're feeling so far. But before we do, a spoiler warning for all involved. This is a recap section. This is literally called Into the Spoilerverse. So we are going to be discussing all things Loki to date. We may also touch on comic canon. We may also touch on canon from the MCU and other Marvel properties to date. But as I said many times beforehand, when we discuss outside sources, we're not there to spoil the plots deliberately or to try and spoil what might come ahead. We're just there to enhance your viewing experience. But obviously, again, we don't know what's coming next in this series because it is quite a unique original story in itself. So we are, spoiler warning, if you haven't seen episode 1 and 2 of the second season, go back, watch them, and come back to us. But before we begin our discussion of it, we're going to recap where we are, both episodes 1 and 2, with our alternate recap. And we return to the TVA to find Loki flickering back and forth between time. Everyone is confused until one of them says, "No, did you ever see Into the Spider-Verse?" Yeah, pretty much that. And they're all like, "Oh, I get you now." Mobius and Hunter B-15 get sent to the war room to explain why they're allowing the timeline to branch while the timekeepers' heads lay on the table. And don't you just hate at work when you get called to the office and your boss has the head of the false gods you've removed waiting for you as receipts? Be cool, dude. Loki shows up and prunes the wall to show a statue of Kang to convince the TVA hierarchy. I don't know what that proves exactly. It's just a statue of a randomer that they've never seen before. It's like me pointing to the Phil Lynott statue and saying, "See, the boys are back in town." Mobius meets Loki, takes Loki to meet Ouroboros, aka OB, who explains in 2 different timelines that Loki is time slipping and a temporal time extractor is needed to pull Loki out of the time stream, but that risks Loki turning to spaghetti and Mobius getting his skin peeled off. For dramatic effect, all of this needs to be done at the same time. The temporal loom, aka the physical manifestation of the timeline, is overloading due to the branches, and OB needs to close the branch doors to protect the TVA. Loki slips into the future where he finds Sylvie in an abandoned TVA as Mobius gets ready to huff the timeline. I'm literally just saying words I don't understand now. Fortunately, Loki gets pruned just in time because the show isn't called Mobius. Meanwhile, the TVA gets geared up to find Sylvie, who in a post-credit scene gives herself high cholesterol and depression by showing up in 1980s McDonald's and asking to try everything. Episode 2 begins as Loki and Mobius travel to 1970s London to find X5 masquerading as movie star Brad Wolfe, who the show created and performed by Hollywood elitists informs us is an absolute dickhead for choosing to be a Hollywood elitist over a menial civil service job. Casey discovers that even though Renslayer tried to delete her internet search history before she bailed, he managed to discover that she was actually subscribed to the OnlyFans of Miss You're Only Gonna Last Minutes. The bad news for OB is he can't get the blast doors open, but the good news is that he has a new bestie in Casey. They discover the only way to open the doors is to convince rogue AI Miss Minutes to come back to work, which is a big ask, to be fair, once you're getting those OnlyFans checks. Loki, Mobius, and B-15 question Brad, who gets mean with Loki, telling him he's not a hero, he's a villain. So Loki goes full Jack Bauer and pulls out the old lawnmower that puts you in an ever-shrinking box torture tactic. Oh, that old chestnut. Until he confesses confesses that he knows where Sylvie is. They go to McDonald's and Mobius and Brad have a milkshake and apple pie while Loki and Sylvie try to work things out until Brad confesses about his work genocide clique. They're the absolute worst. I hate those cliques in work who are destroying all of the branches. They stop them, but not before they kill billions of variants, which is going to be at least a first written warning. And ladies and gentlemen, that was the first 2 episodes of season 2 of Loki. Again, Dan, we kind of know where we're at. No, that was a lot. I can't breathe. I need you to speak. We kind of know where we're at after episode 1 last week. But for the benefit of the listeners, let's do a check-in on where we're feeling after episode 2 overall on Loki season 2 so far.
So, as we said, like last week in the pruned show, that we absolutely loved episode 1. It was just fantastic. Episode 2, it obviously was a lot slower, but you need that initial burst of excitement from the first episode to get you into this one. But as far as episode 1 went, it kept a lot of the stuff from the first season just going forward, kept them exciting. Season 2 is kind of like, setting that story in motion now. So, and we know obviously there's going to be like a Victor Timely scene coming up. We've seen a few things, a lot of people theorized in the trailers. So we can see the roads that they're about to walk appearing before us now. So first 2 episodes off to an absolute belter of a start.
Yeah, loving it so far. Absolutely loving it. I feel the show has clicked in a way it just didn't in season 1. And for me, it's on current pace. It could go down as my favorite MCU TV series today without being a risk-free property as well, because it is still swinging. And when Marvel swings, sometimes it misses, particularly, and Marvel can be guilty, particularly in the TV shows, of being really intriguing in the first few episodes. And then when it all has to come together, it all falls apart. So that's not beyond the realms of possibility, but so far, amazing start. I think one of the big differences, and we discussed this last week, was grounding it in the TVA rather than centering the kind of collapse of time around this small familiar location and characters we know and like already, rather than kind of a new adventure in another world each week, which they tried last season. I feel that works much better when you see things through eyes of people you like rather than just kind of randomers that you don't know or care about. It hits a lot better. It looks incredible. It's made with love and passion, and I feel this in a way that it's just, not that it wasn't last year, but I feel like the series reins has been passed off from Michael Waldron, who was the creator and writer of the first season, to Eric Martin. And I feel like Eric Martin just gets it and just loves this show and is all about it. And I think the detailed end credits and how beautiful they are in illustrating like kind of the aspects of the TVA and highlighting them compared to season 1 just show the love that this show is made with. We spoke last week about how we didn't really understand aspects of it as well, but the show is so confident in how it tells its story, leaning into kind of comic book tropes rather than trying to sidestep them as the MCU projects will sometimes do, that it's a thrill ride, and I'm finding myself absolutely relishing watching it. I'm getting up in early hours every Thursday night, Friday morning. I'm watching Gen V followed by this, and I am loving it because they are 2 shows that are absolutely knocking it out of the park for various reasons. I thought this episode, again, like you said, was very slower, but I think it needed to be. I don't think they could have sustained the pace, and they would have definitely worn us out, especially if you're watching it all in one go, binging it towards the end. It needed to be a bit more character orientated. It needed to be a bit more centralized on Loki rather than just stuff going on, and like center our characters and their arcs, and it did all of that. So this show is like almost 10 out of 10 for me so far. Loving the first 2 episodes. They are getting this so right. And it's so good to be following an MCU property and not just worried the entire time about what does this mean for the stakes? Is the MCU dead? And thinking about those things and just being able to sit back, relax, and enjoy it all. And I kind of touched on it there, and we discussed it a lot last week about how the show worked in spite of us not actually understanding much of what's going on. Did this week's episode clear that up a little bit, or are we still just kind of submitting to the chaos as we were last week? We're just like, I don't know what's going on, but this is fun as fuck. And I'll just let you take me on this journey with you. Did it clear things up for you?
I think we're just still submitting to the chaos pretty much, because I think we came to a lot of really nice conclusions last week, which I'm sure we're going to go back and visit now in a while. But I think it's a sort of show which, like you said, taking it back to its comic book roots, there's a lot of elements of the comic medium that are starting to really find their way into this. And one of them is discussing with your mates. I mean, comics are rife with theories and stuff like that that you don't come to until you sit down with someone who's consumed the same media as you and discuss it. And last week we really, really hit that. And I think a lot of stuff I was confused about, a lot of stuff you were confused about. I think we kind of wrapped it into a nice, neat little package. I'd say that's going to be the premise going forward every week, but that's awesome. I was like, wait, what the hell is going on here? And then once you're like, no, you're forgetting about this thing from 2 episodes previous, and then it all comes together. And I'd say, as Marvel do at the beginning of the third act of this entire series, I think everything is going to be bundled up nicely together, and we're going to be able to sit down and really enjoy where they're going to take us with the conclusion. And it's a Marvel franchise, so it's going to be a conclusion, i.e., what's next.
Yeah. I think as well, though, like, and to kind of touch back on what I previously said, they lean into the comic tropes in a way that they've just never been confident enough to do with the MCU today, even at its peak. Like doing stuff like a temporal time extractor or the lawnmower this week, like it's total bollocks. And it doesn't matter. We don't care. We're not here for realism. We're here to watch crazy shit. And if you just make us laugh, like, why does the thing that puts him in a box have to like be started up like an engine, like a lawnmower? Why does that happen? But it's ridiculous.
It's so terrifying. I mean, they work in a place can access all realities of different timelines, and there's all this gnarly shit in history that can, I know, extract your tongue out through your armpit or something like that. And this guy's afraid of a vacuum cleaner. It's like, I want to visit these writers' room sort of meetings, and I was like, what was scared the shit out of him? That's a vacuum that makes orange boxes. Specs as well, because we don't want to offend anyone with like using too much glass or something like that or whatever. I don't know. It's ridiculous, but I loved it. I was trying to figure out what this thing was going to do to him until it moved on. And like I said, that was one of the most enjoyable parts of the episode as well. And then what happened, I don't think I was disappointed. I thought it was gnarly.
Yeah, we're like, why does it have to be real? Why does it have to be disgusting? And then you're like, why did that create a box? How did it create a box? How did the buttons work? Like, I love that shit. It's like, yes, lean into that. A temporal time extractor, clear bollocks. But like, it's as well, it's like, oh, you're going to need this, but you don't have it. Oh yeah, here it is. And it's just like, okay, that's just perfect. I love it. This is why we like comics. And again, Marvel sometimes has seemed ashamed of that and insecure around that, and almost are trying to explain it too much. And in some projects, you have like wide reams of expositional dialogue where a character's like, and it has to be this way because blah blah blah, and then this, and we're like, we don't care. We just tell us what the premise is and we'll go with it. We're watching fucking aliens in space, like fighting fucking super demons. Like we don't give a shit like about realism. We're just tell us the stories. And this is what the show got right for me, because I think it really cleared up the stakes. There's one line that I like to quote from this episode that just, no matter what Marvel has swung at in the multiversal saga, like they nailed it here. They nailed it. And they nailed the stakes in, what is it, 6 words. They got the stakes right of what's at stake in the multiversal saga that Ant-Man couldn't do, that Doctor Strange couldn't do, that Loki season 1 couldn't do. And it was towards the end where you have Hunter B-15 standing there just going and watching the timelines dissipate and going, those are people, those are lives. And it just was like ton of bricks. I'm like, yeah, this is just constant genocide. And this is just us saying that our universe matters more than the rest and so on. And I'm like, I get it. And it's just so simple. It's just bring it back. Like on one stage, they're getting ridiculously crazy in a way that we like and delights us. And they're kind of just, again, you'll have little scenes where they're like, another brilliant scene in this week's episode, Loki having key lime pie with Mobius. And he's like, yeah, one time I got so mad at my brother and my dad that I invaded New York with an alien thing. And I like tried to throw Tony Stark off a building and I just lost it. Like, amazing. They're making jokes out of how ridiculous it is, but also making it so simple to understand the human stakes in it. So even if you don't understand what's going on, you can understand that the line disappearing means billions of people are dying, and that is fucked up, and really hammers it home. So it's so good at getting so wild but so simple at the same time, and that's what is just, the storytelling level is impressive. And we're starting to see arcs emerge with our characters now. So this week they kind of gave us where our characters, the journeys our characters will be going on for this series. You have Loki kind of wondering if he's a hero or villain and what side of himself he'll have to kind of embrace. And you've got Mobius having an existential crisis, like wondering about how he's going to be, and Sylvie as well, but we'll discuss her in a moment. Where do we see these two in particular? Loki and Mobius seem to be, they're going to be very intriguing, and they're going to have to get to a certain endpoint one way or another. What are we thinking? What are our media first impressions of where we see these going?
I think Mobius's story is going to be encased solely in the Loki series. Now, obviously, we've gotten season 2. We know there's not going to be any season 3 until they move into a new saga. So, could the Loki series continue in several phases down the line, but outside, like independent of the TVA? So, for that reason, that's why I think Mobius is gonna do his work here. Like when season 2 ends, even if the Loki show goes on, pretty much that's gonna be him, unless they decide to Men in Black him and he gets back to the sacred timeline or his alternate timeline, depending on where they're gonna finish up with everything. And he has lost his TVA memory, and he's just living a life like the kind of butterfly effect alternate ending sort of deal as well. So that's where I think Mobius is going. I think the whole thing is he's a dedicated soldier to the TVA. He deserves his peace. He deserves his white picket fence, and that could be him regaining his life. And I'm calling it. I know I've seen it in the trailer. Ski boat salesman. He's so obsessed with them. We've seen a shot of a ski boat shop from the front of the thing. I believe that's going to be Mobius's life that he was made a variant from and branched off somehow. So I'd say, because he keeps bringing it up, so I'd say he's going back to that. And the point we made about Loki last week was that and I've seen it more and more now, believe that he's going to gain more powers from this, and one might be some control over universe dimension hopping, which we've seen in numerous different characters throughout comic books. But the one that I brought attention to last week, which opens up like the rabbit hole quite far, but let's peer into how much it goes, is with a character like Nate Gray, who exists in the comics during the Age of Apocalypse thing. Nate Gray was young Cable, and his ability was very unrefined on his psychic powers. He could actually hop through dimensions, hop through alternate timelines, stuff like that. That's how the character was introduced into the comic book 616 universe. Now, if Loki was to gain these powers, because Nate Gray, the X-Man, was a very, one-track character. He existed to facilitate a couple of stories, and that was it. So could Loki fill that void now and branch the gap with the X universe that we know Daredevil's included, and of course Daredevil having a major tie to X-Force and Cable. That is Loki, because who does not want to see Loki and Ryan Reynolds Deadpool doing stuff together? Like if he's to take this character's place from the comics, how much that would work. So I believe Loki is going to become the past Loki, the Asgardian Loki that we know from the Infinity Saga, is being weaned out, and I think we could get the Nate Gray X-Man Loki. So same character that we all know and love from a screen, but with a unique list of different powers that's going to facilitate future stories. That is my theory right now.
I would be so up for Loki, and Tom Hiddleston's performance this week was just incredible. I would be so up for Loki just being a character who can drop into every story at any stage, like almost like a multiverse style Nick Fury for the MCU, he just can pop up at any time and you never know, because technically he's connected to everyone, and again the common theme is time. So I really hope that that's the case. I agree. I think, the end, like the end scene of this could be Mobius waving to Loki while he's on a speedboat or something like that. Again, that seems very, very likely. And I love also like the hero and villain side that he's, and again, I think the moral of most of these stories, we know it. It's a it's a tale all the time story. Where it's like, which part of myself do I accept? And the answer is always you accept both sides. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't have to be a hero. You don't have to be a villain. You can be just you, and I like that aspect of it. But also I think the work they've done with him and his performances, now he's it's just so complete and 180 spin, but it's never questionable. We never miss the old Loki, if that makes sense. And that can happen. Like, we're used to the world of wrestling where you have a loved babyface or a loved heel who turns babyface because he's so charismatic. And when he turns babyface, he loses everything that you liked about him. Loki still has everything that he likes, but he has this empathy. Like, even, and I'll go back to before the key lime scene, there's a bit of comedy in there where Loki's like, "You were clearly walking in front of me. How could you be
Yeah.
following me?" But like, he's empathetic and he's like, "Is everything okay? You're not yourself. Do you want to go get pie? Do you want to chill out?" And he has that aspect to him, and he's trying to share the Avengers story kind of as a way of connecting to Mobius. They've just, that transition has happened seamlessly. Like, it is, and he's still the exact same. There was that element in this episode where it made us question. I loved the start of the episode where we kind of got to see him be a god again and kind of use his powers and kind of actually kick ass, because I feel like that was something that we missed. And the fact that we know, no, Loki's still Loki,
still
and
there.
he can still do some shit. Like, but I think also they haven't really tilted their hat towards this yet. But I think it's also part of that is his self-acceptance of who he is now, and he's able to be all sides of himself again. And he's able to be the god, the Asgardian god, all the positive aspects, while also having the heart and the humanity and the empathy that he's developed kind of throughout this series. But I want to talk now about Sylvie, because last week we both were on very much the same page that we struggled to connect with her as much as other new characters introduced in phase 4. And kind of, I was worried in particular, like, that it'd be a risk of this series. And again, I only say it because, big anxious head on me. I'm like, I love it so much. What if they ruin it? What could happen? But I'm like, maybe it'd be a risk to kind of put, because last week it seemed like all the stakes were in Sylvie's arsenal, and that all the characters were there to facilitate Sylvie's arc. We got a taste of her, and we obviously got her back in a more substantial way rather than just the post-credit scene and the little clip of her last week. This week, and we kind of got an idea of her motivation. She just wants to work at McDonald's. She just wants to live there. Of course, the end of the show kind of indicated that maybe she's kind of thinking that over and wondering if that's the case, or she needs to go back. How do we feel now at this stage after getting a taste of where Sylvie fits in the grand scheme of things? Are we finding it easy to connect to this version of Sylvie, the McDonald's employee with the cool ladies hairstyle? How are we kind of feeling now around that?
Well, it's still interesting because the scene from episode 1 where she opened up the lift during what was going on with the TVA, where it was being trashed, that's obviously a very crucial point that, being based in the future, we need to get to. And with Sylvie this week, there seems to be a massive gap between that. So she's trying to leave her rogue guard, sort of wandering god persona behind. She wants to move on and just live a normal life, which is a trope that always kind of gets thrown out, especially in a lot of comic books. So it fits here. But how does she get from the disdain she's feeling for Hoki now, the fact that she's got her own little life, she seems to be playing at being content. I don't believe that she's fully happy here. I think she's just taken the best option afforded to her. But how does it get to this destruction of the TVA where she seems to play a crucial role in the future, which we've already seen in episode 1? Because we got into the point last week that Loki, while he was time hopping between those three timelines, there was an issue with the sacred timeline in the past, the present, and the future. That's the one he was dealing with at the time. They were talking at the end of the last episode of season 1 that there is like suddenly a lot of branches appearing. And then when he goes forward in the future, the TVA seems an absolute anarchy. Sylvie seems to play a massive part in that. So, of course, we believe that when he's time hopping, he accesses these 3 times, which I think is going to come back into play again. I think that's going to be a mechanic that's going to be used towards the end of the season. But with the TVA empty and Sylvie here, she's obviously going to play a crucial role. But it feels like we're only beginning her story now this week, having what we'd seen last week not have happened yet. Bear with us, people. These the first time I described the Back to the Future 2 to someone feels like this as well. No, that was him in the past, and him in the future was in the last movie, and now he's on top of him, and he's playing the song from the first movie and the second movie. It's hard to keep track of this shit, but we've only really seen. Let's take that we've seen Sylvie for the first time in this episode. I think is the best way to understand what's going on. The post-credit scene and the future scene almost don't count. So we have yet to see her whole story unfold. And of course, looking at the He Remains, I can't remember the name of the thing they used to hop between dimensions, his archaic version of his dimension jumping wristband thing that the TV have. She's obviously going to start that journey now. So I think we've a long way to go. So this week, as opposed to last week, going, it's Sylvie in a lift, don't really care. Now I'm interested with this little bit of exposition to see where she's going to go and how crucial the role is going to be. So we know it's going to be crucial, so I can sit back and enjoy the ride now, knowing that it's definitely going to go somewhere relevant.
I felt reassured this week.
Yeah,
with how they used her. I felt, and the reason I felt reassured was because this show is called Loki, and we're here because no matter how many times he's lost, no matter how many plots he's been in, Tom Hiddleston is just too damn good that the MCU can't let him go. And he just keeps making time and space for himself. And it's amazing. And this week, they really allowed Tom Hiddleston to flex, chew scenery, and flex so many different muscles. You know what I mean? Throughout, he was charismatic, he was empathetic, he was badass, he was a superhero, he was a normal guy working in an office job. He couldn't fix a TVA, kind of just gadget. He was everything this week. And it was like, yes, Brad, this is still the Tom Hiddleston show. For me, the risk was I didn't want them to go the way of Kate Bishop or Yelena Belova and have her just replace an old kind of OG Marvel character. I felt that would be a mistake because I think it would be a huge downgrade going from Hiddleston to her. And no offense to the actress who plays her by any means. It's not about her. It's just Hiddleston is so damn good. It's controversial a little bit, and I made this point last week, but I will double down on it. Because again, there's so much of storytelling these days is about you shouldn't just have female characters there to drive male motivations. And I get it, I do. But it kind of works here. You know what I mean? It does work in this series because again, there's one very clear star. Now again, she can have her own separate motivations, and that can be significant, and that can be a major part of the storyline, and it is. But her being a supporting character to our main character rather than the co-lead makes much more sense. I'm a big fan of what she brings if she is in that secondary role. Like, she's spicy. She can add little cheeky comments and stuff like that as well. We've all known a Sylvie in our lifetime, someone who, no matter what you say, even if she likes you, is still going to just come back with a sassy, biting comment and fight you on something. But you still like all the same. Like, I loved even when her and Loki held hands and she just turns around at one stage, she's like, don't overthink it. And it's just brilliant. And as well, like I'm intrigued in her storyline. I think the fact that she wants to stay in McDonald's, but she kind of knows that old trope of, she spent all her life wanting a normal life, but then she realized that, again, that's just not for her. She's got superpowers. She's born for different reasons, and she has to kind of embrace that. But I think her wanting to stay in McDonald's and wanting a normal life away from the madness of the TVA and not to be defined by that, I think that adds stakes, and it adds a tragic element that I think is going to serve this show well. Because I think that's obviously inevitably going to get ripped from her, or she's going to have to embrace it and walk away from everything she thought she ever wanted. And that's tragic, and that's sad, and that gives us more of a reason to connect with her and care about her. Again, whereas last week I was a little bit worried because everything was like, Sylvie, we have to find Sylvie. Every character is invested in what Sylvie thinks. This week it's like, Sylvie can be a part of this, and that works. But like, again, just kind of keep her like as a supporting character. Like, this is the Tom Hiddleston show, and this is what we're here for. But I think on that note, one thing this show does incredibly well is supporting characters. And again, I'm not even talking about, we've already touched on Mobius and Sylvie, but I'm even talking about the kind of auxiliary characters underneath that, again, are just played for cheap laughs, but they actually are really good at fleshing those characters out and making us care about them. There are 3 so far that we've got, and I kind of want to know who your kind of MVP of this kind of category is. You've got Kihi Kwan's OB, you've got Raphael Castell's Brad this week, or X5 as well, and then you've also got Eugene Cordero's Casey, who's getting a bit of a promotion, and stepping up after a couple of like just funny, like, again, he's the guy from season 1 who's like, oh yeah, we use those Infinity Stones as paperweights, and again, they've obviously just be like, yeah, this guy can go, so let's let him cook. Who's your favorite of these? I can't tell you there. Sorry, I can't hear you.
My bad. I've got a bit of a flu, so I've been muting it on things.
All
Don't
good.
want to annoy anyone.
All
But yeah,
good.
so Ki Kwan's OB is going to be the winner, without a doubt. I just love the character. I love his interactions. I love his lack of people skills, which is a really odd thing to like, but it just makes his humor just so palatable, which is one thing that ruined Quantumania for me, which was just the absolute god awful humor. Just that they just felt like they had to throw in because something for the kids. It wasn't child friendly humor as well, so I don't know who they're aiming it at.
Yeah.
But this sort of humor and this sort of TV show medium works out so well. Obviously, being an old school Goonies and Indiana Jones fan, it's great to see him back. And like everyone else has picked up on this week, but I think we were the first to say it above anyone is that Ki Kwan was a choreographer. He knows, like, his action. He knows his action storytelling, which we're both huge fans of for obvious reasons. And to see him actually in the Marvel Universe now, having done the fight scenes for the original X-Men movies, is absolutely brilliant. So he understands that physical storytelling that obviously and any actors have, but being that it's rooted in this sort of choreography and child acting, very unique sort of amalgamation, it lends himself to play this character incredibly uniquely, and he's going to be one of those characters who no one else could play. So happy out.
I'll also give credit. Casey is great. I do like Casey. I love
Their
him getting more
interaction was
screen time.
fantastic.
Yeah, and I love their little budding bromance. Like,
Yeah,
and
the other line that everyone missed was, "You just write your name beside my picture, and I'll draw mine in." So wait, hang on. Did he say he was going to draw his picture beside his honors picture? And I was like, I don't know if I want to rewind that or not. So if I'm wrong, they're like, "What is he talking?" That's what I heard, and I was like, I hope that's the line because that's awesome. Draw your
amazing.
picture in, love it.
Yeah, just like best friends. But as well, this is the type of character, and you spoke about Ant-Man there, and again, Quantumania was missing this, but this type of character works so well in the MCU. He reminds me, like, not in terms of similar character, but just in terms of the way he's used, like Luis out of Ant-Man. And it's just like this kind of quirky, different character is just so good. And like, again, they've just got it right with Eugene Cordero. Brad, I think, was phenomenal. Loki MVP this week. Loki spelled a different way, not the main character of the show. But Brad was absolutely amazing this week because they're like, first off, I didn't expect we'd ever see or hear from him again after his one line last week. So to kind of expand as much as they did and make him so central, but for him to be able to carry it as well, that's how well this show is made and directed as well. Like, they have amazing casting, like they've amazing talent casted, but also like what they do with them is so fantastic because, again, the offbeat humor that they allow everyone to have and everyone to play. I remember, this is a bit of a tangent, but like, we used to do like a radio show on a station, and like whenever anyone would come on our show, they'd end up just getting wrapped up in the weirdness of it all. And like, again, we just turned really serious broadcasters into just like absolute wild things who are like hilarious and just doing shit that you'd never see them do otherwise. That's the kind of effect that this show has on people. Because it's like, it's normal characters and kind of by the books kind of villain of the week's type, but because this show is random, like, again, we end up with like, Brad kind of just sitting there soaking in McDonald's, but he has a milkshake and the milkshake's nice, so he's just drinking it, but he's drinking it angrily. You know what I mean? It was such a small thing, but it was brilliant. But I agree, this is Ki Kwang's world and we're all living in it. He is phenomenal. I live for much more. We joked last week that like, and we're only half joking that like, is this the new Robert Downey Jr.? Because a lot of his line reading is very similar to the first time you watched RDJ when he was playing Tony Stark. It's like, oh my God, that joke was amazing. And he just threw it away. He just left it out there and I'm doubled over. Like, even the way he just throws away lines, like, again, and we didn't get enough of him this week. I really don't want him to downplay it and just have it be a cool intro. I want him to be a central figure of this show. Like last week where it was like, you've got an hour, you've got 5 minutes. Or
Yeah.
like at one stage where you had like what was it, Mobius be like, you ready to see some huffing like you've never seen before? And he's just like, okay. And he's just, it's one word, it's not anything, it's what the way he delivers it is just fantastic.
Yeah.
He is a ball of energy. And again, like you say, it's just such a happy story to see him back, and he's just
Yeah.
so deserving and likable. And like, again, just to see him get this success, I cannot like have enough of OB in my life. They
Yeah.
need to write him into every property that they have. They need to make him like Kang's henchman and just have like him just travel with Jonathan Majors, or whoever plays Kang, or whatever happens with that in the future, all the way through this saga, because he needs to be in every property. He is
Yeah.
fantastic. I
I mean,
love him.
Harrison Ford still likes him, and Harrison Ford hates everything. He hates everything. Also, we know. Okay, we went down really far down the rabbit hole with General Ross last season with Secret Invasion,
Yeah.
but we know Harrison Ford is going to be playing Thunderbolt Ross. We know
Imagine.
Wee Kwong's in it. All we want is just one whatever. Even if that's going to be our post-credit comedy scene for the end of the season,
Imagine.
we want OB looking into an alternate timeline and seeing Jenna Ross in the White Office going, sorry, or whatever. I don't know. I
I
don't
know that
care.
guy.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
some because they did. No one noticed this last week. They did a callback to the Goonies, which everything I've read, everything I've seen so far, no one picked up on. And I said it to my partner Kelly. I was like, that was a callback to the Goonies. She was like, what? We rewound it. But the bit where he says we're going to the temporal loop, and Loki goes temporal loop, because that's what I said. And that's always what Data used to say in the Goonies, because he always mispronounced everything. Absolutely no one picked up on that. So there
Do
is
it.
going to be that fan service there. So come on, Marvel, jump the shark.
Do it. You know you want it.
Give us Thunderbolt Ross and OB. We need it.
You know you want it.
We
Amazing.
all want
Oh,
it. You want it.
I
Everyone
hadn't even
wants it.
thought about that. That is fantastic. I would love that. I would pop so much. What we haven't seen so far, interestingly, is we haven't seen, probably the main talking point of the season beforehand was Jonathan Majors
Yeah.
Kang, and obviously everything going around. And we spoke about this last week, but I'll repeat it here, obviously, because people didn't hear it. Look, he's a part of this show. It's an ongoing legal case. And you're not tuning in to hear our thoughts on that, and we're not qualified or have enough knowledge to be able to give you thoughts on that. So again, we're not negating the issue. If he is guilty of the charges that he's accused of, we obviously abhor and condone anyone who commits those kind of crimes. But at the same time, it is a highly contested ongoing legal case. And again, we can't make those decisions. So we just have to take it as is. We're going to see him, but if we don't discuss the legal cases, it's not us glossing over it. It's not that we don't care. It's just that we can't, and that's not why you're here listening to this show.
Yeah, it's not NBC, like, it's not Sky News. We're not here to report on the case. We're here to talk about comic books, movies, and comic book TV shows, but sometimes reality can cross over too much where it needs to be brought up. So I think whatever we can do is keeping opinions or whatever on the down low. We think, I think what you said last week was great. If you being a woman, you're a scumbag. And if this proves out to be that's what he said, and he's found guilty of it, then he's a scumbag.
Yeah.
But we obviously have to address how, irregardless of what the outcome is, which we're not going to discuss again, iterate, how this is going to take everything going forward, being that we know that he's being set up to be the big bad in Secret Wars.
Yeah. And also we may just totally contradict ourselves, because when we see him, we may feel differently, and it may like ruin it, and it may be something that's uncomfortable and whatever. And that's just the way, and we'll observe that if it is. But again, like, we're just going to talk about Kang and the situation and let the real life kind of take care of itself in the background. In the meantime, we haven't seen him, or we haven't seen Renslayer, though we did hear her spoken about this week. So we don't actually have a proper antagonist so far. Is the show missing that? And when do we think we'll see them show up again? Probably two different questions there for Kang and Renslayer, but kind of how are you feeling about the lack of these kind of major characters that are supposed to drive the story?
One of my favorite scenes from last week, which we previously discussed once again that no one heard, was I really like the setup of Loki selling Kang to Mobius. So the analogy I made is one of my favorite moments in wrestling, which we always draw similarities to, is during the build up to the 2000 Royal Rumble, in which Mankind was wrestling Triple H in a street fight. He said he couldn't do that, and he set up Cactus Jack, which is also the person playing Mick Foley, as the person who was going to wrestle Triple H. So, in essence, what like the layman would see is a guy taking off a leather mask and a white shirt and having a black T-shirt on, and he's going to be wrestling this person instead. But Triple H, what he did and what he did as a visual performer is really sold the terror of what Cactus Jack was. So when he saw that T-shirt, his eyes went wide. He leapt back. He was terrified, and doing that did more work in those 4 weeks of a build-up, those couple of seconds of Triple H just using his face, did more to build what it was an amazing, iconic match than anything else he'd done previously. And Loki did that in season 1 in the scene where he was describing Kang to Mobius. He was terrified. He was genuinely afraid of what's coming, the potentials, what could happen, seeing the power in this person. So even though we haven't seen Kang yet or anything to relate to him, like, because we know some of his variants are coming, and I think by the end, a lot of his variants are going to be coming. But we have the looming threat of what Kang is in the in the series already. So he's there in essence, just not in person. They did a really, really bad job of demonstrating his power in Quantum Mania again, which we're going to have to keep pulling back to because they showed his near omnipotent level of power, but then they showed him being defeated by bugs.
Yeah.
Like you closing your eyes and lower your head there says it all. But we know now, and well, we can theorize now that what we saw was as close in aesthetic and his hokey original power from the comics that was that Kang. But then, of course, now the post-credit scene of Quantumania leads itself into more that we know that these timelines are coming together. The theory is obviously that the branch timelines will join up for branch timelines from different elements of the multiverse and create essentially this snakes and ladders tiling board that's going to allow the Kangs to come true, because that's what they were alluding to at the end of season 1, that the timelines are separate for that reason, but these branch timelines could potentially be creating ladders that the Kangs will use to escape the bondage of their own insular universes. So that Kang, everyone like, how is he going to come back from that? Because, Kang the Kang dynasty was coming. But that Kang is done. We've seen one of trillions of infinites. And we've just got a taste of his power. So the fact that he was killed by bugs now is becoming more and more irrelevant. So when we see him show up, and they've talked about that the guy that was killed in Quantumania was just one of many, and then we did get to see how powerful he was, and there is, we discussed the different variations, and they also have this ability to make variations of Kang be someone completely different, that they've almost lost that memory from all their traveling or their cloning or whatever the loopholes they decide to go through. So they've done a good job of keeping the Kang presence there. This one again, they haven't mentioned him as much, but they know procuring Sylvie's can be very important when it comes to defeating him. And we also know from the post-credit scene as well that we are going to be meeting Victor Timely, who in the comics, to the best of my knowledge, was one of the earliest ones, because Amun Ra existed, but that was a time-traveling variant. But it seems to, I imagine it's all going to start with this Victor Timely, and we're going to see the preview that we saw in Quantumania come to full fruition, that no matter how many of these you kill, because of the branch universes, because of the multiverses, you have an endless army. And I think that's what's going to be the thing that causes this terror. And I think that's what Loki sees.
I'm going to be honest and change kind of what I said last week in light of this episode. And again, I don't like criticizing shows for what it's not and projecting what I want it to be onto them. In terms of the episodes, like I said, I agree that the 2 episodes from an entertainment and storytelling standpoint have been 10 out of 10 so far. But when I think of the fact that Kang and Renslayer are both looming as villains in the background, it's the one thing the show has maybe neglected a little bit. And I'm only kind of coming to that realization now as I really evaluate the questions.
Do you feel like we have to see them next week at least?
Yeah, like at least Renslayer. Like Kang, I can hold off until maybe the second or last episode, and like we get like a taste of it, and or something like that. I don't mind that, because again, big bad, and that's what we had with Thanos. He just kind of loomed in the background constantly until he became the story. and that's fine. But I think we need to get back on track because, again, it's if the Renslayer kind of discussion this week felt very forced, it'd be very easy to forget it. It'd be very easy to forget her as a character. Like, again,
Yeah,
without
yeah.
apart from her voice last week, she just wasn't mentioned. So who is she? What are her stakes in this? We need to get to this now, and we need to actually introduce this threat, and we need to make this central, or else it's just not going to be. Because for now, at the end of episode 2, they've kind of won. Like they've like again, it's horrific what has happened in terms of the timelines. And they're obviously dealing with that. But again, they've eliminated the threat. So now it's just dealing with the emotional consequences of kind of what the kind of rogue TVA agents have done. But again, there's no threat right now, and there's no kind of tension left beyond Sylvie. Will she? Won't she? So they really need to get to that. Like Renslayer needs to show up next week, or that needs to be what the story is about. And this week it just felt tacked on, and you could have blinked and missed it, like because it was literally a case of like. Casey's like, oh, BT Dubs, Renslayer, and then like they bring them over to have a discussion with Loki and Mobius, and he immediately gets distracted by something else. And it's like that's not great. If she's to be your kind of middle bad and Kang is to be your big bad, or however that's going to play out. So I do think that needs a bit of love and focus. But if next week that's what it's about, we're all good. And again, I'm enjoying this show. So it's not a huge criticism, but again, it's just something to have on the FYI list. Speaking of which, what are your thoughts on next week? Again, one thing we agreed on last week was it's very difficult to make predictions about this show because that would require us to grasp the plot in a way that I'm not sure it's possible to unless you're writing it. But do you have any thoughts or predictions on what we might see, or what are your hopes or expectations are?
Well, one thing we talked about last week, but didn't come to fruition. I mean, it still could, in some level, in some alternate way, was that the relevancy of Oklahoma as it pertains to the Thor mythos, which this is still a subsect of, is that Oklahoma is where New Valhalla is in the comics. Now, in the MCU universe, it's in Norway. But could we see Sylvie now establish something there? We're wondering if she would then in the next episode see New Valhalla as it exists. I'm not sure what year it was introduced. It was in the 70s, definitely. I think it was like the late 80s in which they brought that into the comics. So they could obviously tinker around with the time and still have it fit. But that's something we didn't see, and it's something it looks like that is not there currently because it would have come up. So could this be where Sylvie settles? Maybe Sylvie ends her story establishing her own version on this timeline. What's going to happen next week? I don't know, but I'm dying to find out. Now, I still find WandaVision was more confusing, especially after the second episode, because we didn't really know what they were doing. We didn't even know anything about Wanda. We had our theories about Mephisto and Agnes at the time, but you could not guess what was coming next week, other than what decade they were going to do, and then fans were wondering, they're fan theorying about what show they're going to parody. And I think with Loki, it's going to be like that. It's like, what do they need to do next week that's going to bring them closer to this area where they need to find what they need to do with timelines now, because they've introduced this empathetic angle now where timelines equate to, billions, trillions of people. So, like, what is the end goal going to be? Who is the big bad? Could it be Kang? Could it be Sylvie? Could it be Renslayer? Just filling in this time, whereas maybe in a movie she'd be a henchman, but in a series like this, she could be a totally valid villain. What else are we going to see with the multiverse, multiple timeline elements at play here? How are we going to see it branch out? How it's going to affect the rest of the MCU? Well, because of the organized chaos of this show, and that's something that lends to its strengths, definitely not a weakness, is the fact that we don't know where they're going to take it every episode. And that's something Marvel have been very, very good at doing. Sometimes it's been a hit and a miss. Like, for example, one of the episodes of Moonlight closed with the deity's name's gone from my head, but the hippo god showing up, and you're like, I thought this was going more into reality. This looks more even psychotic. Like, what is happening next week? WandaVision, as I already mentioned, Loki. They have this ability to very much keep you on your edge of seat, which is something that's very, very prevalent in comic books. Like, there's been several times throughout, especially the MCU, where an insignificant story closes in one issue of, it could be anything, like a subtitle like Excalibur, and then the last scene suddenly a sentinel swings by, follow, find out what happens in X-Men number 55. So as a reader of one title, you have to go to something else to figure out what's going on. So you don't even know sometimes from week to week what comic you'll be reading. So I'm just going to stick with this subtitle for the time being. I'm just going to stick with Superior Spider-Man. Then suddenly a character appears in that, and then you have to go either into Amazing Spider-Man or maybe even X-Men to follow where that story that's intrigued you is going. So you don't know what you're going to be doing from week to week, and the fact that they've been able to apply this element to the shows, I think, is a masterstroke, and I think it's something that lends to its popularity. And the fact that even though people are still talking about superhero fatigue, the hardcore audience is still going to tune in every week because there's that familiarity.
Yeah, and like, what a great way, an intelligent way, because I feel like Marvel has spent so much time trying to figure out how to do TV, and it's like, no, why can't TV be like comics? Why can't they? Why are we saying they're episodes and not issues? You know what I mean? Like, and again, like that's you've been doing serialized storytelling for decades. Like, this is not new to you, Marvel. You just need to kind of, embrace what you are, and that's kind of what Loki is doing, and we're excited. And we don't know what's going to happen. We don't really know how to ask that question, but damn it, doesn't it feel good to be back in the MCU and actually having faith and knowing it's going to be good? It's great. We're loving this so far, and we hope to continue. We're going to be discussing it next week and every week right through the finale, and then we'll be kind of talking about the Marvels as well. Next week, obviously, we're taping this on Friday, so this day next week is a big day, the release of Spider-Man 2 as well. We may touch on, again, we're not a video game podcast, but we may touch on, because again, I think it's going to be a lot of crossover and interest from people who listen to this are going to be getting the game. So we may touch on how we're feeling after 1 and 2, the first 2 games, including Miles Morales, and then kind of do our hype measure and then check in on how we're enjoying the game as the weeks go on. But Dan, I'm loving these chats, even though technically this is the first one the listeners get to hear this season. 2 very solid chats, though, I assure you. Last week's was just amazing, if you hadn't heard it. But Dan, pleasure to be back with you. Pleasure to have you back on page 180. Can't wait to continue, and we shall chat to you next week.
See you then.